Hey guys, it's Jess, and I am so excited to be a guest designer on the Heffy Doodle blog today. I am going to be creating a really fun and super cute scene card using two stamp sets, Absotoothly Awesome and Happily Ever Crafter. Now, if you're new to my channel, you might not know, but if you have been around for a while, you know that I love to create cute mashups between multiple stamp sets, and today is no different. So I decided I wanted to make it look like the cute little fairies were dropping this castle off for someone's birthday, like they were creating a magical little day for someone. So I tried to stamp it out to make it look like they were holding the castle, and they're going to be lowering it down onto a cute little grass field, which we will create in a little bit. So to start off, I'm just using my mini Misty and stamping out the images. And then I did go ahead and make masks with all of these images. I decided I wanted to do some ink blending for my background before I did my coloring, and I felt like this was going to be a good way to build up my scene without having to do a bunch of fussy cutting for the pieces and then layering them on top. I don't mind to fussy cut the masks. I feel like it's a little bit easier than trying to make a perfect border on a more die cut looking piece. But you could definitely use coordinating dies for this if you are not a fan of masking, and just pop the little castle and the fairies up off of the card instead of having it be a one layer card. So here I am just cutting out the masks. I'm using a pair of really sharp scissors and going to town cutting up that castle, and I did the same thing for the fairies as well. Once I was done with all of my fussy cutting, I went ahead and placed the masks directly onto my card panel, and that covers up the stamped images so that I can start creating a background without worrying about whether or not my images are going to be ruined or if I'm going to accidentally ink blend on them. So I decided that I wanted to do some Distress Oxide ink blending. So I've taken my mini ink blender tools and some Distress Oxides in some fun colors for a nighttime scene. I started off with some dried Marigold down at the bottom. Then once I got that ink blending done, I did move on to some Victorian velvet. So that gives me a nice yellowish orange sort of look down at the base. And you can see that I'm leaving the bottom of the card white here. I am going to go in after I finish the sky portion and add in some grass, but I wanted to come back and do that separately after the fact, and I like to leave just a little bit of a white border in between the sky and the ground because it gives sort of the illusion of a horizon, and I hope that you guys like that once it's all pulled together. So after the Victorian velvet, I went in with Seedless preserves, and then I topped off the sky with some chipped sapphire. After all my ink blending was done, I did go back in with the black soot and deepen those shadows around the top and the edges just so that it really looked like a nighttime scene. And you notice that I did put a little bit of the chipped sapphire ink into the lighter colors down at the bottom. I felt like that gave it more of a gradual turning nighttime appearance, and it just, for me, made it seem a little bit more exciting and realistic with that really cool change of color there. So now I'm coming in from the bottom with the Lucky Clover Distress Oxide, and then following that up with the Pine Needles color. I added the lightest color first and then deepened the shadows with the darker color, and then again went in with the black soot just to darken up and add a little bit more depth and dimension to that background. With the masks still on and in place, I'm using some Distress Spray Stain in the Picket Fence color, which is just white. This does absorb into the background quite a bit, but it gives a nice texture to your background without getting too much water on your panel. For this one, I didn't want to add too much water just because I didn't want my masks to get saturated and then damage the clean space underneath. So here on a little laminated piece of cardstock, I put a little bit of white gesso. This is opaque, and I watered it down a little bit with the Distress sprayer, and then I used the Distress splatter brush to splatter that gesso directly onto my background. This does not absorb into the paper the same way that the Distress spray stain does, and it sits on top really nicely, which gives the perfect starry night feel. So I went ahead and peeled off the masks. I feel like that's probably probably my favorite part of a whole card when you're doing a scene like this. And now I'm getting started on my coloring. I am using the Spectrum Noir Classique markers. This is a new marker from Spectrum Noir. They are alcohol based and I really, really like the results I get with these. There is quite a bit of coloring here, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on some music for you, and I will be right back with you after the coloring is done. All right, so our coloring is just about done here, and we're going to move on to assembling the rest of the card. So I decided that I wanted to have some black sentiment strips. I really like the way that these look against a nice, vibrant, blended background. Let me know what you guys think. Is this something that you like to do, or do you prefer to stamp directly onto your card panel? I'd love to know what you guys think. So I'm using a piece of black cardstock here, and I'm using some white embossing powder. You just put the sticky ink directly on there, brush off the excess powder after you've poured that embossing powder on. I'm using a coffee filter to catch the extra embossing powder, and then I just dump it right back in the jar when I'm done. So that paintbrush is really handy to get rid of any excess embossing powder, but you do want to make sure to treat your surface with an anti-static powder tool first, just so you don't have that embossing powder stuck where you don't want it. I use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder, and then I'm ready to go ahead and cut apart my sentiment strips. I used kind of combined sentiments from the two different stamp sets. I used Wishing You A, and then the birthday sentiment from Happily Ever Crafter, and then I actually used the standalone fairy die, which coordinates really well with the Absotoothly Awesome set. I went ahead and die cut that in a piece of really sparkly gold cardstock, and then I set the die cut, or the die itself, directly on my piece of black cardstock. I used a pencil to trace around the physical die, and then now I'm using a pair of scissors to cut out that shape that I traced out, and this gives you a perfect shadow piece for your die cut. So if you're ever looking, you want to have multiple layers but you don't have two separate pieces, that die doesn't come with that option, you can always add your own shadow by tracing around the outside of the die, and it usually fits really perfectly. I haven't had an issue yet where one hasn't fit with these words, so it works really well. So once I finished my cutting, I went ahead and adhered the gold piece directly to that piece of black cardstock, and I did find the little dot on the eye as well. Once that was attached, I started trying to figure out exactly where I wanted things to line up. I decided to go ahead and cover some of the castle. I wasn't really sure if that's what I wanted to do, but I think it turned out looking really cute. You can still see it and tell that it's a castle for sure. I went ahead and adhered those to my card panel. I did pop the fairy piece up on some foam tape for some dimension, and that finished off my card. Just mounted it on a white A2 size card base, and that is it, you guys. I hope you love the card. Be sure to drop me a comment and let me know what you think about it. I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're not already subscribed, definitely consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys again in another video really soon.